stand on the precipice of a silent, frozen world, where the air itself seems to bite, a cold that doesn't just touch your skin but seeps deep into the very marrow of your bones. Before you, the vast, unforgiving expanse of Wyoming's Teton Range stretches, a monument of craggy peaks and snow-laden pines, all mirrored in the treacherous surface of a frozen lake. Here, in this breathtaking tableau of majesty and desolation, life hangs by a translucent thread, a mother bear and her two tiny cubs trapped, isolated, their fate poised on the brittle ice. The question, stark and chilling, echoes through the sepulchral silence. Can nature's raw desperation summon an unexpected, inexplicable form of help that defies every human logic you've ever known? Or does the calculated rationality, so often our default in the face of immense danger, actually conceal the true, elusive key to their salvation? You feel the doubt settle, heavy and cold, in the icy air. The biting mountain air nips relentlessly, a constant sharp reminder of the unforgiving environment, stealing your breath with each gasp. The lake, a vast, brittle mirror, reflects a leaden sky, heavy with unspoken threats, and the stark silhouettes of ancient snow-laden pines, standing like silent sentinels to this unfolding tragedy. Beneath the struggling weight of the trapped family, each faint crack of the ice is an imminent, terrifying sentence, a sound that reverberates with a dreadful clarity in the profound, almost sacred silence of the range. You can almost hear it, the faint groan of the frozen surface, a warning whisper of impending collapse, a chilling prelude to an inevitable end. Their icy breath, visible plumes in the frigid air, mixes with the vapor escaping from the distant, anxious nostrils of unseen observers, a stark visual of life battling the relentless grasp of winter. This isn't merely a rescue operation, it's a profound moral paradox laid bare on a canvas of ice and snow, challenging every preconceived notion you hold about control and chaos. You're forced to confront the core of human intervention. Do you trust the methodical, meticulously calculated logic, the years of scientific understanding and engineering that defines our approach to crisis? Or, in this primal setting, does an ancient, inexplicable instinct, a raw, untamed wisdom that defies all explanation, hold a more profound truth, a hidden path to survival? The choice feels immense, burdened by the weight of lives, a stark binary presented by a silent, indifferent landscape. You can feel the tension, a palpable hum in the frigid air, as the very essence of doubt hangs, heavy and cold, over this precarious scene, demanding an answer that might not exist. Imagine the sheer terror etched in the mother bear's eyes, a primal fear as her cubs, vulnerable and small, shuffle precariously on the thinning ice, their fur matted with frost. You see their desperate attempts to find purchase, their paws slipping, each movement a gamble against the abyss below. The vastness of the Teton Range, usually a symbol of wild freedom, now feels like a colossal, inescapable cage, its towering peaks mocking their plight with their stoic indifference. This isn't just about saving animals. It's about witnessing in raw, untamed spirit pushed to its absolute breaking point, a poignant testament to the fragility of existence in the face of nature's overwhelming power. Every gust of wind across the lake carries a silent plea, a desperate cry for intervention from a world that seems to have forgotten them. The very air tastes of impending doom, sharp and metallic, a constant reminder of the limited time, the dwindling hope. You watch, feeling a knot tighten in your stomach, as the translucent thread holding these lives begins to fray, almost imperceptibly, yet with an undeniable certainty. The sun, a pale, distant orb, offers no warmth, only a sterile light that illuminates the grim reality, casting long, stark shadows across the ice, highlighting every dangerous fissure. This cold is not just external, it's an internal chill, a creeping dread that whispers of what might be lost, of the lives that could vanish beneath the unforgiving surface. You find yourself questioning the limits of human capability, the boundaries of what can be saved when confronted by such an overwhelming elemental force, and the answer feels agonizingly out of reach. And so you are left with this stark, chilling tableau. A family teetering on the brink, a landscape of breathtaking beauty that holds a terrifying secret, and the silent, pressing question of how to bridge the impossible gap between them. Do you place your faith in the measured steps of human ingenuity, the careful calculations of experienced minds, or in something far more ancient, a whisper from the wild that speaks of an entirely different wisdom? The stakes are immeasurable, the silence deafening, punctuated only by the subtle, ominous groans of the ice. But just as the weight of this impossible decision threatens to crush all hope, a faint, distant sound begins to break through the stillness, a sound that doesn't belong, a ripple in the otherwise perfect, frozen calm. The vastness of the Teton Range, a canvas of formidable rock and relentless snow, stretched endlessly around you, each peak a silent witness to countless winters. The air, thin and sharp, carried the scent of frozen pine needles and the metallic tang of extreme cold, biting at any exposed skin, reminding you of nature's indifferent power. A pale, weak sun struggled to pierce the heavy, leaden sky, casting long, stark shadows that danced across the brittle surface of the frozen lake, illuminating the desperate tableau of the trapped bear family. Every gust of wind whispered through the ancient trees, a mournful, drawn-out sigh that seemed to amplify the crushing silence, a silence broken only by the almost imperceptible groans of the stressed ice beneath the struggling animals. You felt the chill deep in your bones, a cold that mirrored the dread in your gut, a palpable sense of isolation in this magnificent, yet unforgiving wilderness. Into this stark, breathtaking landscape stepped Ethan, his figure a study in rugged determination, yet etched with an almost imperceptible weariness that settled around his eyes like frost. A veteran mountain rescuer, his movements were precise, economical, born from years spent navigating the treacherous whims of these very peaks. His weathered face, framed by a hood pulled tight against the relentless wind, bore the subtle lines of countless battles fought against the elements, each one a silent testament to a life lived on the edge. You could see the internal struggle in the taut set of his jaw, the way his gaze, sharp and focused, never truly left the distant, struggling forms on the ice, betraying a deep-seated commitment that transcended mere professional duty. He carried the weight of experience, a heavy mantle in this desolate, unforgiving arena. Years ago, etched into the unforgiving memory of these very mountains, a different expedition had ended in tragedy, leaving an indelible mark on Ethan's soul, a scar far deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just the loss of his best partner that haunted him. It was the shattering of his own judgment, the erosion of the unshakable confidence he once held in his decisions. That failure, a bitter taste in his memory, had become a constant, quiet whisper, challenging his every move, a shadow that clung to him like the persistent mountain mist. Now, watching the mother bear's desperate plight, that old fear resurfaced, a chilling current beneath his resolve, the terror of not being enough, of nature, in its boundless indifference, snatching away the lives he so desperately yearned to protect. His unwavering motivation to save lives was inextricably bound to this profound, aching desire for redemption. Then, from the swirling tendrils of icy mist that clung to the ancient pines, a new presence emerged, a silhouette against the stark white canvas. Duke. He was a German shepherd, his dark fur matted in places, a testament to countless nights spent under the vast, indifferent sky. A whitish scar, a jagged line across his flank, spoke volumes of past encounters, of a life lived on the wild fringes, a survival story etched onto his very being. His gait was fluid, wary, the movements of a creature perfectly attuned to the subtle shifts of the mountain, each paw placement deliberate and silent. He was a wanderer, a solitary soul whose existence was a symphony of instinct, his senses honed to read the whispers of the mountain wind better than any human could ever decipher a map. Duke's initial caution quickly dissolved as his keen gaze, dark and surprisingly intelligent, fixed upon the distant, struggling forms of the mother bear and her cubs. It wasn't merely the fleeting curiosity of an animal. There was an intensity, an almost profound recognition in his eyes that transcended the usual boundaries of species. He stood, a silent, watchful sentinel, his head cocked slightly, as if listening to a frequency in the frigid air that remained utterly inaudible to human ears. This wasn't just a dog. He was an echo of primary instinct, a living, breathing testament to the raw, untamed wisdom that permeated this ancient landscape. You sensed in him a walking moral compass, a noble spirit whose unwavering loyalty seemed to know no species barriers, an unexpected observer in this unfolding drama. As Ethan and his meticulously trained team finalized their complex plan, each step a calculated risk, each piece of equipment carefully laid out on the snow, a sudden, sharp sound sliced through the heavy silence that had so long blanketed the Teton Range. It was a bark, persistent and urgent, ripping through the oppressive stillness, startling the gathered observers. Duke, ignoring every human warning, every instinct for self-preservation, dashed towards the treacherous perimeter of the frozen lake, his dark form a blur against the pristine white. His inexplicable urgency, his disregard for the obvious danger, was an anomaly, a piercing cry that planted the very first unsettling seed of doubt in Ethan's carefully constructed, rational mind. Was this a mere distraction, a wild animal's foolish impulse, or a profound sign they dared not ignore? Just as Ethan and his meticulously trained team finalized their complex plan, each step a calculated risk, each piece of equipment carefully laid out on the snow, a sudden, sharp sound sliced through the heavy silence that had so long blanketed the Teton Range. It was a bark, persistent and urgent, ripping through the oppressive stillness, startling the gathered observers and sending a jolt through your own nervous system. Duke, ignoring every human warning, every instinct for self-preservation that might suggest caution, dashed towards the treacherous perimeter of the frozen lake, his dark form a blur against the pristine white. His inexplicable urgency, his disregard for the obvious danger, was an anomaly, a piercing cry that planted the very first, unsettling seed of doubt in Ethan's carefully constructed, rational mind. The air, already biting, seemed to grow even colder, thick with an unspoken question. Ethan's first instinct, honed by years of rigorous training and the bitter taste of past failures, was to dismiss it as a mere distraction, a wild animal's foolish impulse, jeopardizing an already precarious situation. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, a surge of frustration battling against the cold logic that demanded absolute control. His mind raced, calculating the risks Duke's erratic behavior posed to their delicate rescue operation, the potential for further instability on the already groaning ice. You could see the internal struggle in his eyes, a brief flicker of annoyance quickly masked by professional resolve, yet the persistent barking continued, a relentless drumbeat against the fortress of his rationality, refusing to be ignored. But Duke neither attacked nor fled. Instead, he barked incessantly, a series of short, sharp bursts, circling the perimeter of the ice with an almost frantic energy. He would stop at specific points, his nose pressed close to the frozen surface, sniffing the air with an obsessive concentration that seemed entirely out of place for a distressed animal. His movements were precise, almost methodical, a strange, deliberate dance against the backdrop of the struggling bear family. He moved with a purpose that transcended simple panic, his dark fur a stark contrast to the blinding white, his focus unwavering as he seemed to read the whispers of the ice, a language only he understood. Ethan observed, perplexed, how the dog seemed to avoid certain areas, barking with greater insistence, a heightened urgency, towards a particular spot on the frozen expanse. Then, an ominous crack, louder than any before, snaked across the ice near where Duke was focused, sending a shiver through the frigid air. Simultaneously, the mother bear, usually a picture of raw, untamed fear, let out a low growl that seemed to calm slightly at Duke's presence, her head turning, almost acknowledging him. Duke then lifted his head, his dark, inquisitive gaze locking onto Ethan, a silent, profound question passing between man and beast that defied all human logic. A growing tension coiled in the pit of your stomach as you watched Ethan grapple with this unfolding, inexplicable scene. His logical mind screamed for him to dismiss it, to adhere to the meticulously planned procedures, but something in Duke's unwavering determination, his almost telepathic connection with the ice, was beginning to chip away at his skepticism. That penetrating gaze from the German shepherd seemed to bore directly into Ethan's deepest fears, challenging his reliance on empirical data alone. Could this wild creature, a product of pure instinct, truly perceive something that human technology, with all its sophisticated instruments, simply could not? The very air thrummed with this profound, unsettling question, a silent challenge to everything Ethan had learned, everything he believed. Duke's barks were no longer just noise. They were a cryptic message, a desperate plea for understanding, echoing across the vast, indifferent landscape. The dog's focused intensity, the ominous crack, the bear's strange calm, and that piercing, knowing gaze, all converged into a single overwhelming enigma. The unspoken question hung heavy in the frigid air, demanding an answer that defied every logical explanation he had ever learned, pushing him to the very edge of his understanding. You felt the insistent weight of Ethan's internal struggle, a tangible presence in the biting air, as he grappled with the unsettling spectacle unfolding before him. The dog's persistent barks, no longer just a chaotic noise, seemed to coalesce into a discernible pattern, a rhythmic cadence that drew his gaze to a specific section of the cracking ice, directly in line with Duke's frantic focus. There, barely visible beneath a thin veil of fresh snow, a small dark object caught his eye, an anomaly in the pristine wilderness that pulsed with an inexplicable significance. It was a discarded ice pick, its metal head glinting faintly, a stark, man-made presence hinting at a previous, perhaps unseen, attempt or presence on this very ice. The air grew colder, thick with an unspoken question, as if the mountain itself held its breath, waiting for Ethan to connect the disparate pieces of this deepening enigma, and you felt the chill of recognition, a shiver that had nothing to do with the biting wind, as the first tangible clue emerged from the frozen expanse. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing away the delicate dusting of snow, revealing the aged, splintered handle of the ice pick. This was not one of their modern, high-tech tools. This was older, a relic, perhaps, from a different era of mountaineering, its presence a jarring dissonance against the untouched wilderness. The metal was pitted, showing signs of heavy use, yet its sharp point remained dangerously intact, a silent testament to a struggle that had unfolded on this very spot. As Ethan carefully picked it up, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ice beneath him, a low groan that echoed the one from the distant mother bear, now watching him with an unnerving intensity. Her growl, surprisingly, was not of aggression, but a deep, resonant rumble, as if acknowledging a shared burden, a silent understanding passing between the ancient creature and the man holding this strange, unexpected artifact. What hidden story did this forgotten tool carry, and why did it appear now? The discovery of the archaic ice pick sent a fresh ripple of unease through Ethan, intertwining with the lingering questions Duke's behavior had already ignited. This wasn't just a random piece of debris. It was a tangible ghost, a silent witness to an unknown event, perhaps a prior failed attempt at navigating this treacherous ice. He ran his thumb over the rusted metal, the cold seeping through his glove, a stark reminder of the unforgiving environment and the slim margin for error that separated life from oblivion. His team, observing from a distance, meticulously rechecked their sonar readings, their faces etched with concern as the data stubbornly confirmed the ice's perilous thinness, directly contradicting Duke's implied safe path. The chasm between logical analysis and inexplicable instinct widened, leaving Ethan suspended in a suffocating void of uncertainty, the weight of multiple lives pressing down on him, demanding an immediate, definitive answer. For a fleeting moment Ethan's gaze drifted from the unsettling ice pick to the distant, huddled forms of the mother bear and her cubs, then back to Duke, whose unwavering stare held an almost uncanny intelligence. A cold wave of memory washed over him, not unlike the icy spray from a breaking wave, bringing with it the vivid, sharp image of his partner's last moments, engulfed by the unforgiving whiteout, a failure that had scarred him deeply. The bitter taste of that defeat, the agonizing second-guessing, began to gnaw at him, a relentless fire of doubt smoldering beneath the surface of his professional composure, threatening to consume his resolve. He clenched his jaw, the raw desire for redemption warring with the rigid adherence to protocols that had failed him once before. Could he allow himself to deviate, to trust something so utterly intangible, when so much was at stake, or was he bound by the very chains of his own past? Suddenly, a deep, guttural groan ripped through the frozen expanse, far louder and more resonant than any previous sound, sending a jolt of raw fear through the frigid air that seemed to pierce your very soul. A new, jagged fissure, long and menacing, spider-webbed across the ice, extending directly towards the trapped bear family, a stark line of impending doom. Duke, as if sensing the imminent threat, let out a series of frantic, high-pitched barks, his body quivering with an almost desperate urgency. He began to scratch furiously at a specific spot on the ice, his powerful paws digging against the unyielding surface, uncovering a small, wooden marker, half buried and almost completely obscured by layers of snow and ice. Its faded inscription, barely legible, hinted at old survey points, a forgotten path, a whisper from a time when these mountains held different secrets, demanding to be heard. Ethan stared at the wooden marker, then at the ancient ice pick in his hand, two disparate symbols of human endeavor now intertwined with Duke's unwavering, instinctual guidance. The faint inscription on the marker seemed to pulse with a hidden message. A forgotten pathway, perhaps, known only to those who truly understood the mountain's capricious heart, a path that their sophisticated instruments simply could not detect. The mother bear, her eyes wide with a desperate intelligence, continued to watch Duke, then shifted her gaze to Ethan, an unspoken plea passing between them, a desperate connection forged in the face of insurmountable odds. The wind howled, a mournful dirge, swirling snow around the three distinct clues. The pick, the marker, and the dog's relentless barks, all pointing to a direction his instruments vehemently denied. He stood at a precipice, not just of ice, but of a profound decision, poised between the calculated certainty of his training and the terrifying, inexplicable wisdom offered by a scarred wanderer, knowing that one wrong choice would plunge them all into the unforgiving darkness below, forever. The air, already thick with unspoken tension, seemed to vibrate as Ethan's gaze, now sharpened by a desperate newfound clarity, swept from the ancient ice pick in his hand to the obscure wooden marker half buried in the snow. Each artifact, previously a mere curiosity, now pulsed with an undeniable, profound significance, directly aligning with Duke's frantic barks and methodical movements. It was as if the dog, through sheer untamed will, was not merely reacting to danger, but actively, deliberately, trying to communicate a forgotten truth about this treacherous lake. A chilling realization, like a sudden drop in temperature, washed over Ethan. The path Duke had been tracing, the one his sophisticated instruments had unequivocally deemed too perilous, was not an irrational impulse, but a precise, almost surgical indication of a hidden, safer passage, known only to the mountain's oldest inhabitants, perhaps even to its wild spirits. This was the moment everything shifted, the world tilting on an axis of pure, raw instinct, and you felt the ground beneath your own feet subtly, terrifyingly, give way. Ethan's initial distrust, a fortress built upon years of rigorous training and the bitter taste of past failures, began to crumble, not slowly, but with the sudden, jarring force of an avalanche. He saw it with crystal clarity now. Duke wasn't a hindrance, a chaotic element threatening their operation, but the very key to their salvation, a living, breathing compass guiding them through a labyrinth of frozen death. The real test, he understood, in that heart-stopping moment, was not merely the terrifying fragility of the ice beneath the trapped bears, but the rigid, unyielding skepticism that had armored his own mind, binding him to conventional logic. This profound, almost spiritual, shift in perspective brought a glimmer of desperate hope, a fragile, almost translucent light piercing the suffocating darkness of their dilemma. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that to ignore this animal's inexplicable wisdom would be a far greater failure than any deviation from established protocol, and the weight of that decision settled heavily upon him. With a bold, almost reckless shift in strategy, Ethan made his choice, a silent covenant forged between man and beast under the indifferent gaze of the towering Tetons. "Follow the dog," he commanded, his voice surprisingly steady amidst the howling wind, the words cutting through the apprehension of his team. Each step became an act of faith, a terrifying gamble on a path that his instruments vehemently, unequivocally denied was safe. The lead rescuer, a veteran named Sarah, hesitated for a microsecond, her eyes meeting Ethan's, a silent question passing between them, before she nodded, trust etched onto her weathered face. The ice beneath them groaned, a low, guttural protest that seemed to echo the very core of their mounting fear, each second stretching into an eternity as they began to advance across the treacherous, slippery surface. Duke's persistent barks their only guide, their only hope. The cold intensified, a palpable presence wrapping around them, tightening its grip. Duke, with an almost preternatural awareness, moved with surprising agility, his dark form a stark contrast against the blinding white, his paws finding purchase where human eyes saw only uniform peril. He would pause, sniff the frigid air, then subtly shift his weight, indicating the precise direction, a silent, eloquent language of instinct that transcended words. The mother bear, her eyes wide with a desperate, animal intelligence, seemed to understand, her low growls turning into softer, almost reassuring murmurs as they followed the dog's intricate dance. This momentary, fragile relief, the knowledge that a path, however perilous, now existed, was quickly overshadowed by the constant, chilling awareness of the groaning ice, the subtle tremors beneath their feet, a relentless reminder that their salvation was still hanging by the thinnest of threads. The sun, a distant, pale orb, offered no warmth, only a sterile light that illuminated every treacherous fissure in their path. As they advanced, each careful step a testament to their newfound trust, the ice around them seemed to protest with increasing ferocity, its low moans escalating into sharper, more alarming cracks that reverberated through the frigid air, sending shivers down your spine. New fissures, like jagged lightning bolts, began to spiderweb across the surface, some dangerously close to their meticulously chosen path, proving that even Duke's profound instinct couldn't entirely negate the immense, overwhelming power of nature's caprice. The team, their faces etched with a mix of apprehension and grim determination, moved with a synchronized caution, each member acutely aware of the razor-thin margin separating them from the abyss below. The threat, far from diminishing, now felt more immediate, more palpable, a living, breathing entity that clung to their every movement, mocking their fragile hope. The air tasted metallic, a chilling premonition of what could still be lost. Suddenly, Duke stopped, his head snapping up, his ears swiveling to catch a sound that remained inaudible to human ears, a subtle shift in the wind, a whisper from the deep. A deep, resonant thrumming, more felt than heard, began to emanate from the very core of the frozen lake, a terrifying pulse that vibrated through their boots, through their bones, a clear warning that the ice was reaching its absolute breaking point. The mother bear, sensing the change, let out a desperate guttural cry, urging her cubs closer, her eyes fixed on the approaching rescuers with a renewed, primal urgency. The confrontation, long a looming shadow, was no longer a distant possibility. It was here, now, an imminent, terrifying reality, the final, desperate gamble about to unfold on this vast, unforgiving stage, and you knew, with a certainty that chilled you to the bone, that the next few moments would seal their fate, one way or another, forever. The deep thrumming intensified, a monstrous heartbeat echoing from the frozen abyss below, and the ice beneath your feet bucked violently, a living, breathing entity finally succumbing to the immense pressure. Duke, without a moment's hesitation, sprang into action, his barks no longer guiding but commanding, piercing the frigid air with an almost unbearable urgency. He darted directly towards the smallest cub, his powerful body a dark blur against the blinding white, his movements a desperate ballet of survival. Ethan, his face a mask of grim determination, saw the unwavering resolve in the dog's eyes, a silent plea that bypassed all logic, demanding immediate, visceral trust. He barked orders, his voice raw with adrenaline, urging his team forward, each step a terrifying leap of faith onto a surface that screamed of imminent collapse. The very air tasted of ozone, a sharp metallic tang of impending disaster, as the final, desperate act of this impossible rescue began to unfold. Sarah, the lead rescuer, moved with an almost preternatural calm, her hands steady as she deployed the specialized netting, its dark lines a stark contrast against the pristine snow. The first cub, tiny and shivering, was scooped up with practiced efficiency, its terrified whimper lost in the howl of the wind and the groaning of the ice. The mother bear, witnessing her offspring's capture, let out a guttural roar, a sound of primal fear and confusion that threatened to shatter their fragile resolve. Yet Duke, positioned between the mother and the rescuers, continued his insistent barks, his intelligent gaze fixed on the mother, a silent message of reassurance passing between them, an ancient understanding of shared purpose. She hesitated, her massive body trembling, her instincts warring with an inexplicable trust, a profound moment of surrender to the extraordinary, as if she, too, understood the desperate gamble they were all taking, a silent prayer echoing in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The ice groaned again, a sound like tortured metal, sending a fresh wave of fear through the team as a new fissure, wide and menacing, snaked directly towards them, threatening to cut off their escape. Ethan, securing the second cub, felt the cold seep through his gloves, not just from the ice, but from the creeping dread that whispered of failure. His boots slipped on the slick surface, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the relentless biting wind. Duke, now a whirlwind of motion, circled the mother bear, nudging her, his barks a continuous, urgent stream, directing her with an almost supernatural precision towards the widening gap in the ice. Every second was an eternity, every movement a gamble against the abyss below, and the air crackled with a raw, primal energy, a desperate dance on the precipice of oblivion. The cold was a living entity, its icy tendrils reaching, pulling at their very will to survive. A sudden, violent crack erupted directly beneath the mother bear's massive paw, and the ice gave way with a sickening lurch, a chasm of black water appearing with terrifying speed, threatening to swallow her whole. You felt your own breath catch, a gasp frozen in your throat, as the primal scream of the wind seemed to echo the desperate cry that escaped Ethan's lips. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the ghost of his past failure, the image of his partner swallowed by the whiteout, flashed before his eyes, a chilling premonition of history repeating itself, a bitter taste of defeat. The mother bear roared, a sound of pure terror, her powerful body struggling against the sudden, treacherous embrace of the icy water, her cubs now safely in the net, but her own life hanging by a thread, a single translucent strand against the overwhelming force of nature's indifference. The world seemed to slow, every detail stark and horrifying. Just as despair threatened to consume them, Duke, with an impossible surge of strength, lunged forward, not towards the water, but to a thicker section of ice directly beside the struggling mother bear, digging his claws into the surface with frantic, desperate energy. He barked, a guttural, commanding sound, his body taut with effort, pushing, pulling, his powerful jaws gripping a loose piece of equipment, bracing himself against the chaos. It was a silent, profound instruction, a desperate act of pure instinct, and the mother bear, in a miraculous display of trust, seemed to understand. She used the small purchase Duke had created, a tiny, improbable anchor in the maelstrom, heaving her enormous body with a renewed burst of adrenaline. Her eyes locked onto the unwavering gaze of the scarred wanderer, a lifeline thrown from the wild itself, defying all logic and expectation. The bond between them, forged in terror, pulsed with a desperate, shared hope. With a final, gargantuan effort, the mother bear scrambled onto a more stable section of ice, her fur matted and glistening with freezing water, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. The cubs, secured in their netting, were quickly pulled further onto solid ground by Sarah and the team, their tiny bodies shivering uncontrollably, but undeniably safe. Ethan, his own heart pounding like a drum, watched as the chasm where the mother bear had been struggling widened, the ice groaning one last, mournful sigh before a massive section splintered and collapsed into the dark, churning water below, sending a geyser of icy spray into the air. Had Duke not guided them, had Ethan not trusted, they would all be lost to that frigid, unforgiving abyss, and the profound, chilling reality of how close they had come to utter devastation hung heavy in the air, a stark, undeniable testament to the razor-thin line between life and oblivion. A breath held, then, slowly, painstakingly released. The immediate aftermath of the rescue settled upon the Teton Range like a soft blanket of newly fallen snow, not the biting, aggressive kind, but a gentle, ethereal covering that seemed to hush the world into a profound, almost sacred calm. The air, once sharp and metallic with the tang of impending disaster, now carried only the faint, clean scent of melting frost and ancient pine, a subtle shift that breathed a quiet sigh of relief into the vast wilderness. You watched as the mother bear, still shivering but safe, nudged her cubs into the temporary refuge, a deep, resonant rumble of contentment finally replacing her earlier roars of terror. The silence that followed was not the oppressive, fearful quiet of moments before, but a deep, restorative peace, a balm to every frayed nerve and every pounding heart, a testament to the fragile victory they had collectively wrestled from the clutches of the unforgiving wild. Ethan stood on the now stable ground, his body aching with exhaustion, but his eyes, once haunted by the ghost of past failures, now shone with a clear, almost incandescent light. The raw, visceral terror of the ice giving way, the chilling echo of his partner's last moments, had resurfaced with agonizing clarity, threatening to drag him back into the abyss of self-doubt. Yet, this time, the outcome was different, a stark, triumphant contrast to the crushing defeat that had defined his darkest memories. He felt the cold chains of his rigid skepticism, forged by years of loss and regret, finally shatter, falling away from his soul like shards of ice under a warming sun. A profound internal victory, far more meaningful than any external accolades, began to bloom in his chest, a fragile, tender flower pushing through the frozen soil of his past. Duke, exhausted but with an undeniable air of quiet triumph, padded over to Ethan, his tail held high, a silent testament to his extraordinary courage and unwavering instinct. As Ethan knelt, his gloved hand reaching out, the scarred wanderer leaned into the touch, a low, rumbling purr vibrating through his powerful chest, a sound of deep, unconditional trust. It wasn't just a simple gesture between man and dog. It was a profound reconciliation, a silent covenant forged in the crucible of shared danger, a bond that transcended species and intellect. The warmth of Duke's fur against Ethan's hand was a tangible reminder of the inexplicable wisdom that had guided them. A raw, untamed truth that had defied every logical parameter, proving that sometimes the most profound insights come not from calculated thought but from the purest, most elemental heart, and you felt the subtle shift in Ethan's spirit, a lightness replacing the heavy burden he had carried for so long. The story, whispered first among the rescue team, then carried on the mountain winds, quickly spread beyond the immediate confines of the Teton Range, transforming into a legend. It spoke of the German shepherd, Duke, the scarred wanderer whose untamed instinct had carved a path to salvation through a labyrinth of frozen peril. It spoke of the mother bear, whose desperate plight had summoned an unexpected ally. But most importantly, it spoke of Ethan, the seasoned rescuer, whose willingness to shed the rigid armor of his own skepticism, to trust the inexplicable, had not only saved lives, but had also mended his own fractured spirit, healing wounds far deeper than any physical injury. The recognition, though never officially declared with medals or ceremonies, was etched into the reverent glances of his peers, the quiet respect in their voices, a silent acknowledgement of a transformation far more valuable than any public accolade. In the days that followed, as the pale winter sun finally began to assert its gentle warmth, coaxing the first trickles of meltwater from the ancient pines, Ethan found himself returning to the frozen lake, no longer a scene of terror, but a canvas of profound memory. He stood at the edge, the remnants of the ice pick, and the wooden marker now just faint impressions in the thawing ground, symbols of a forgotten path now rediscovered. The silence was different now, infused with a newfound sense of peace, the quiet hum of life returning to the mountain. He saw the world with new eyes, no longer just a series of problems to be solved with logic and calculation, but a complex tapestry of interconnected wisdom, where instinct and intellect, wildness and reason, could intertwine to create something truly extraordinary. The fire of his past guilt had finally extinguished, leaving behind only the embers of gratitude and an enduring sense of purpose. The encounter had etched an indelible truth onto Ethan's soul, that some mysteries are not meant to be solved but embraced, that true strength often lies in the courage to surrender control, to listen to the whispers of the wild that defy every human explanation. He understood now that the most profound lessons are rarely found in textbooks or training manuals, but emerge from the heart of the unknown, challenging us to look beyond the visible, to trust the unseen forces that shape our world. The vastness of the Teton Range no longer felt indifferent, but alive with a deeper, more benevolent wisdom, a silent mentor. And as he gazed at the distant peaks, a profound question settled in his heart, a quiet contemplation of what other hidden truths lay waiting, just beyond the edge of human understanding, ready to be revealed to those brave enough to simply listen. The immediate aftermath of the rescue settled upon the Teton Range like a soft blanket of newly fallen snow, not the biting, aggressive kind, but a gentle, ethereal covering that seemed to hush the world into a profound, almost sacred calm. The air, once sharp and metallic with the tang of impending disaster, now carried only the faint, clean scent of melting frost and ancient pine, a subtle shift that breathed a quiet sigh of relief into the vast wilderness. You watched as the mother bear, still shivering but safe, nudged her cubs into the temporary refuge, a deep, resonant rumble of contentment, finally replacing her earlier roars of terror. The silence that followed was not the oppressive, fearful quiet of moments before, but a deep, restorative peace, a balm to every frayed nerve and every pounding heart, a testament to the fragile victory they had collectively wrestled from the clutches of the unforgiving wild. Ethan stood on the now stable ground, his body aching with exhaustion, but his eyes, once haunted by the ghost of past failures, now shone with a clear, almost incandescent light. The raw, visceral terror of the ice giving way, the chilling echo of his partner's last moments, had resurfaced with agonizing clarity, threatening to drag him back into the abyss of self-doubt. Yet, this time, the outcome was different. A stark, triumphant contrast, to the crushing defeat that had defined his darkest memories. He felt the cold chains of his rigid skepticism, forged by years of loss and regret, finally shatter, falling away from his soul like shards of ice under a warming sun. A profound internal victory, far more meaningful than any external accolades, began to bloom in his chest, a fragile, tender flower pushing through the frozen soil of his past. Duke, exhausted but with an undeniable air of quiet triumph, padded over to Ethan, his tail held high, a silent testament to his extraordinary courage and unwavering instinct. As Ethan knelt, his gloved hand reaching out, the scarred wanderer leaned into the touch, a low, rumbling purr vibrating through his powerful chest, a sound of deep, unconditional trust. It wasn't just a simple gesture between man and dog, it was a profound reconciliation, a silent covenant forged in the crucible of shared danger, a bond that transcended species and intellect. The warmth of Duke's fur against Ethan's hand was a tangible reminder of the inexplicable wisdom that had guided them, a raw, untamed truth that had defied every logical parameter, proving that sometimes the most profound insights come not from calculated thought, but from the purest, most elemental heart, and you felt the subtle shift in Ethan's spirit, a lightness replacing the heavy burden he had carried for so long. The story, whispered first among the rescue team, then carried on the mountain winds, quickly spread beyond the immediate confines of the Teton Range, transforming into a legend. It spoke of the German shepherd, Duke, the scarred wanderer, whose untamed instinct had carved a path to salvation through a labyrinth of frozen peril. It spoke of the mother bear, whose desperate plight had summoned an unexpected ally. But most importantly, it spoke of Ethan, the seasoned rescuer, whose willingness to shed the rigid armor of his own skepticism to trust the inexplicable had not only saved lives, but had also mended his own fractured spirit, healing wounds far deeper than any physical injury. The recognition, though never officially declared with medals or ceremonies, was etched into the reverent glances of his peers, the quiet respect in their voices, a silent acknowledgement of a transformation far more valuable than any public accolade. In the days that followed, as the pale winter sun finally began to assert its gentle warmth, coaxing the first trickles of meltwater from the ancient pines, Ethan found himself returning to the frozen lake, no longer a scene of terror, but a canvas of profound memory. He stood at the edge, the remnants of the ice pick, and the wooden marker now just faint impressions in the thawing ground, symbols of a forgotten path now rediscovered. The silence was different now, infused with a newfound sense of peace, a quiet hum of life returning to the mountain. He saw the world with new eyes, no longer just a series of problems to be solved with logic and calculation, but a complex tapestry of interconnected wisdom, where instinct and intellect, wildness and reason, could intertwine to create something truly extraordinary. The fire of his past guilt had finally extinguished, leaving behind only the embers of gratitude and an enduring sense of purpose. The encounter had etched an indelible truth onto Ethan's soul, that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but embraced, that true strength often lies in the courage to surrender control, to listen to the whispers of the wild that defy every human explanation. He understood now that the most profound lessons are rarely found in textbooks or training manuals, but emerge from the heart of the unknown, challenging us to look beyond the visible, to trust the unseen forces that shape our world. The vastness of the Teton Range no longer felt indifferent, but alive with a deeper, more benevolent wisdom, a silent mentor. And as he gazed at the distant peaks, a profound question settled in his heart, a quiet contemplation of what other hidden truths lay waiting, just beyond the edge of human understanding, ready to be revealed to those brave enough to simply listen.